Hey folks, here to talk about a character who's been in the game for a fairly long time now, and I've had some time to kind of fester on him, as well as kind of get an idea of his own problems, and also kind of meander and see what some different skill builds could be good on him. And that character is Gangrel, Plegia's Mad King. Now, I won't pretend and say he's the most perfect character or anything close to that level, but he's a very interesting character to consider building not only for PvE but also to maybe consider for AR if you're so inclined. Well, the immediate question might be asked of why use this character when you can just use other more easily mergeable plus attack dagger units with broadleaf. Really, my main argument is lost orb opportunity cost combined with the limited availability of broadleaf. In fact, we only have it in one weapon, and this also combines with Gangrel having a fairly different niche. His stats across the board are pretty serviceable, all things considered, sitting at a very decent 46 attack and 38 speed at base, which is complemented by his weapon effect, which gives him an additional +4 to all his stats when an enemy is debuffed. This is alongside a very unique effect of pure damage based on 20% of his res in combat is pretty interesting. When you combine this with some mythic stat buffs alongside summoner support, you get a much more serviceable 49-47 stat line. With really not a ton of investment, it's only one merge and a couple flowers. You go from getting 6 to 7 pure damage per hit to hitting now much more respectable 9 to 10 pure damage per hit. And that's before I mention the extra +4 attack he gets from his weapon effect, which thus translates he'll be doing about 13 to 14 damage per hit additional. When you further combine this with his own damage debuff, it's a very respectable 20 to 21 additional damage he does to his enemies. Things get even better when you start looking at max investment, where with appropriate supports and buffs, he'll be likely doing an additional 11 to 12 pure damage per hit in combat, and thus 22 to 23 damage per hit when you start considering his dagger debuff, his weapon buffs, etc. Meanwhile, you do have to consider a broadleaf user likely before their first combat will sit at +14 additional damage, and their follow-up combat would be an additional +35 damage per hit when you combine all that they're negatively debuffed in all stats. While you might ask why I'm making a direct comparison to the broadleaf, I just want to put in perspective the opportunity cost one has when running Gangrel strictly as a unit to compete against broadleaf as a whole. He does lose in terms of pure damage output, but he does put up a pretty decent fight all things considered. The Soth, as listed above, which would be his strongest competitor, will be outputting effectively 73 attack in their first combat with Tamara's support, which debuffs attack and speed, and following will be doing 90 damage or 97 additional damage with Brazen active without even considering summoner support. Meanwhile, a Gangrel at max support does 71 damage in their first combat and 78 their following combat. The 22 to 27 damage share speed can be understated in direct comparison. It's a pretty big discrepancy between the two, but the fact that Gangrel can even come close without even using the broadleaf is a kudos to him as well. Really why I made this video as a whole is this one idea I've been sitting on for a pretty decent amount of time, and I think this is the more interesting Gangrel build to consider, and it's the anti-range build, which I believe is his most compelling niche compared to all his competitors. With maximum invest, this anti-range unit can hit a clean 65 res stat without too much of a hassle, and thus 13 pure damage alongside +4 again from his weapon for a very strong +17 damage buff. In essence, which combined with attack buffs means we hit back ranges for 77 attack per hit, and likely doubling a vast majority, while denying the enemy of any of their buffs and specials. In an AR meta where we're becoming more and more centralized against a bunch of range units trying to attack into your backline, etc., he stands apart from the norm with some outstanding traits. There's really not a lot of really melee spam when it comes to top AR outside of some very, very outstanding units such as Elliewood or Bike. You really are seeing more and more range units, especially with specials up. As a whole, he has a very respectable res stat to clink off most of those range units, hit on his magic side, and even on his defense side. He can hit a very respectable 43 stat without a ton of support as a whole. He stands as a very unique check. I hope this gave you a different kind of perspective of Gangrel, and even if you don't necessarily want to build him, but at least put him in the back of your mind if you ever have trouble with the range spam as it becomes more and more common. And honestly, I really don't think it's gonna go anywhere. I think as AR becomes more developed and as we get more and more defense mythics, we're going to see much more impressive maps with a bunch of range and probably a lot more caps. If you like this kind of stuff, feel free to let me know. I think this kind of stuff is interesting and I'd love to do it a lot more and maybe even make them more in depth with much more different unit builds.